we here at the Strange Conversations podcast want to say Black Lives Matter, and we stand with the movement and the protests that have been happening all across our country and all across the world. And with this whole episode, Dylan and I have been talking a lot about what we wanted this episode to be, and we thought it would be best to educate ourselves, to learn a little bit more about what music is and where it really came from.
It's been a really impactful, awe-inspiring couple of weeks, seeing the scale of like the movement of people unanimously and like united in saying that Black Lives Matter and dedicated to going out onto the streets every day and fighting for change. And we thought that in that time it felt both disingenuous and it also felt very hollow to try to continue to do Strange Conversations as usual. We decided that we really wanted to just be good allies and to listen and to learn and to use our platform, as small as it may be, to share Black voices with our audience. And so this episode, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of why, if you're a rock and roll fan of any sort of genre or subgenre, so much of what you love and what you listen to, even if you don't necessarily recognize it or know about it, is indebted to Black creators and Black voices. And so we're going to go through some of the things that we have found through digging through the music we love, that we have found really are ode to Black artists, and some amazing and influential and creative voices from a lot of the history of, mostly, I guess you could call it, punk music that encompasses so much. And so I guess without further ado, we'll get into our episode here.
Yeah, we're excited for you to hear this episode. We're also excited to present our new theme song right here, which is going to start playing, Dylan. We made this one too, so hope y'all enjoy it. And we hope you enjoy this episode. So, welcome to Strange Conversations, where Black Lives Matter. I'm Austin Kenny.
And I'm Dylan Bennett. And this week we are going to be doing a deep dive into some of the artists who definitely got the short end of the stick and were cut out of music history and were very influential and very important. And we think the spotlight should be shined on what they contributed to the music that we love so much, mostly being kind of like rock and punk. But we're going to be going, pretty far back down the canon and showing that there's great music that didn't get its due in its time. And we hope that, we can convince you to give it its due now, because it rocks.
Yeah. I think too with the Black Lives Matter movement, Dylan and I both, we really wanted to educate ourselves too with music history because a lot of black artists just kind of get wiped from the history books who have seriously invented rock and roll. There's no way around it. Yes, a lot of white artists have played a big part in rock and roll and they get a lot of the credit for it, but they are all profiting off of a lot of black songwriters. So we really wanted to try to shine the spotlight on some artists who were looked over and who we really love. I guess we're really focusing on punk rock here. We're gonna maybe probably dive off into some other tangents, get into some modern music, hopefully at the end. But we're really gonna be looking back. We're gonna be going way back to start things off, I think,
Yeah.
because I mean, yeah, like I said, all in all, we wanted to be talking about punk rock here, but
There's
hotly debated
yeah.
topic where it may have started, but at least like the idea of it is I don't know, it's all over the place where the idea of punk came from.
Yeah. I feel like it's certainly, if you pull on the threads enough, like if you start with like kind of the more stereotypical, like this is where punk started artists, like whether it's the Ramones or the Sex Pistols or the Velvet Underground, if you really start pulling on those threads, like without a doubt, you get back to the blues, you get back to the Delta blues and the Delta area of Mississippi, and you get back to black music so quickly because just the structure and the history and the inspiration and attitude of punk, but also just of rock and roll. It really is. It's an appropriation of the attitude of Delta blues artists. Um,
It's just it's that kind of music that it was the idea of it is I feel like with punk is giving the listener or giving the artist a voice. It's a place to vent and to let out sort of your grievances and your angers with the world. And so Delta blues was that for so many slaves, like in the sort of the area down there when the blues started. It was people in the slave trade singing their grievances and stuff like that, and from there it just kind of continued to grow into such an explosive and emotional genre where you have people like Muddy Waters ripping guitar solos, but then you go back to artists like Son House who are playing songs on one strings but are ripping your heart out. It's all the blues, but it is just such a wide and vast genre that is, I think when you get down to it, it's definitely what inspired punk music. And I mean, it is what inspired rock and roll music. So yeah, it definitely is what
yeah,
inspired and
yeah.
led into punk music.
There's kind of like it's sort of a bit of like a kind of like a shitposty meme, but there's like kind of like within the punk community there's like this idea that like in the most extreme sense is like, oh, you use more than three chords, like it's not punk rock. But like when you really get down to it, it's like it's about a sense of like authenticity and a sense of like accessibility, and the idea that anyone can be a musician and anyone can create moving art is like a radical idea, and it definitely does not start with white starving artists in New York City or London. Like it started with the people who were just ripped of all resources and were so poor in the deep South in the era of Reconstruction and Jim Crow, who created the blues through like African music traditions and through just like folk music traditions that really, like can be traced all the way back to the continent of Africa. But seeing the way in which, like you talked about Son House, like his most well-known song, and I think his most popular song on the internet at least is People Grinning in Your Face. And it's just like it's a song that it's imbibed with like so much like power, and it's literally just him singing to himself clapping. And it's like it's taking that meme of like, oh, there's more than two chords in your song, it's not punk. It's like, well, there's no chords in this song. It's like he played this song on one string. Like there's
Yeah.
not even another instrument beside his voice. So
Oh my god. And it's
it's
just
like
like that song, like it'll like either get me pumped or like make me reflect on my entire life. It can go one of two ways when I hear that song, like ready to start a revolution or ready to cry in bed. It,
yeah.
it can go either way. But
It's
yeah.
it kind of blows my mind too to think about there's in some ways like the kind of whitewashing of the blues as like rock music became really really big, like kind of starting with classic rock in the 60s. A lot of artists, like white artists like the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin or whoever, like taking blues into a more like white mainstream place. It starts to make the Delta blues feel like really old, and it makes it feel like it's something that's been like excavated from like way back in the past. But one artist that always blows my mind when I read about them is Junior Kimbrough, who's
Mm.
like a Delta blues artist who the music, the quality of the recording, the like the musicology itself, it fits right within the Delta blues genre. And it sounds like something that you'd think would be like, oh, this was recorded in like the 40s or 50s. But the reality is, Junior Kimbrough's was putting out albums in the late 80s and 90s, I believe, because he was discovered by like a music journalist in the deep deep South in the 80s. And the fact that people were still living in such intense rural poverty, I think that gets like glossed over a lot. I think like especially our musical heroes and like the canonized bands, like worshiping the blues starts to like fetishize the poverty and the suffering of those people a lot, and we start to forget about the fact that like none of those musicians ever got like their due within their lifetime, like except for maybe Muddy Waters or like maybe Lightning Hopkins. A lot of those blues musicians were recorded by anthropologists or journalists or music fanatics and then left to just remain in poverty. And it's a really deeply disturbing part of rock and roll history. But those artists are so incredibly influential, and the music they made is so powerful that like I think we gotta try to avoid the sort of the Eric Clapton-esque sort of fascination with the blues as this like pristine like technical art form, when the reality is a lot of those early blues recordings are they're rough but in a really authentic, really exciting way.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think I watched this Eric Clapton video once where he's talking about trying to play a Robert Johnson tune and he just can't do it. And I think it just speaks to the level of playing of these musicians where it's really not a technical wonder. I think that drove them to the ability of their playing. It's just the circumstances and
Yeah.
where they were raised, and it's just incredible how they play guitar. It's just unmatchable, and no one will ever be able to kind of do these rhythmic patterns that they're able to do with like their thumb and all of their fingers at once. It's just like it's truly unbelievable what these guitar players were doing. Like, I mean, you Robert Johnson is the classic example. Sold his soul at the crossroads. That's probably like the most punk rock story ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
and these artists really did just live a life of poverty, and we see artists like Jack White too. I think kind of trying to equate themselves with their style of music at times, and it's a type of music that can truly never be matched because it is truly, yeah, I can't really say anything more about it, but it's just like their level of playing is just truly phenomenal.
I feel like it's kind of a well-known history of how the blues became rock and roll through like the 50s and especially then through the 60s. The most important era for rock music, and I think Austin will probably agree with me, is what happened to it in the 70s. rock music became such a cultural institution through the popularity of, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or the Kinks or Led Zeppelin or what have you. But I really think it was punk music turning it on its head that gave it the longevity and the artistic license to be able to survive more than just being a popular music genre, and why it's had decades of relevancy. And unfortunately, I think maybe even more so than any other kind of rock music, punk is so whitewashed. Maybe metal
Oh
is a
yeah.
little bit more, but punk is so whitewashed.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking to see because punk is so indebted the to black people because it is just for example, I think where we're gonna start with this one is death in 1973. This is before the Ramones, where even like a blimp on people's radar really is death is just miles and miles ahead of every other artist around them, but partially because of the way that the people viewed black artists at the time. They just like never got signed. I mean, yes, partially because of
Yeah.
the name, um, but yeah, I mean, before we get into death, I'm sorry to cut you off, Dylan. I don't know if you had any kind of more you wanted to say,
No,
transitioning
yeah,
into this
I
part.
was gonna, yeah, I was just gonna go off on death because they're great.
Yeah, I mean, they're so crazy. Like I've just been like jamming to them so hard, and you listen to them and you think they've kind of emerged sort of in maybe they're just timeless. I don't know. They're timeless. Their lyrics today, politicians in my eyes, for example, that song is just it's just it speaks true as today as it did, when they released it.
Yeah,
Um,
the
the one
political relevancy is sadly like they're sadly politically very relevant, like from the 70s. I feel like that's part of the reason why I think they got turned away, because I mean at this time, like this was the era of like the Black Panther Party, and this was an era where the only thing that scared white Americans more than punk rock was Black Americans. And I think the fact that you have a mixture of those two things, you have like Black radical politics and like Black liberation mixed with early punk rock. It's like this is a combination that's like powerful and volatile and just like designed to terrify white people. And it's insane that they don't get their due.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. Like, people credit the Ramones as the start of punk, but Death is known as the band that was punk before punk was punk, because
Yeah.
they just were three brothers from Detroit, Bobby Hackney, Dennis Hackney, and David Hackney. All three of them just playing in their house in Detroit, like making like their neighbors shouting at them to turn down, just like true punk artists, just like making noise, being loud, and miles ahead of the Ramones, miles ahead of the Ramones.
Yeah,
The Ramones
they
are cool, but like the Ramones are like, I hate my mom and dad,
yeah.
but you are pretty rad. And it's like,
Yeah.
all right, cool, but like Death is playing like politicians in my eyes, and just like the bass and the guitar is just like ripping, and the Ramones are, it's like, I want to go to the beach with you cuz my stepdad is a tool, and it's like, oh, come on. Like people think this is where punk starts. It's like, come on, like Death
Yeah.
just fucking rips that out of the water.
And it really sucks that also I feel like people give so much credit where credit is due to London and New York being sort of the geographic centers of early punk music. And while insanely influential artists came out of both of those cities, and they were certainly hubs, Detroit never gets its due. And I think you could write a long, long book about Detroit, and there probably is one for all I know, about how Detroit is probably quietly the most influential music city of at least the 20th century. I mean, Motown is all Detroit. All Detroit is Motown. So like
Have you ever been like seen Motown before?
No,
I
I've only driven through Detroit, like on my way up to like northern Michigan, but
I, I
I've
went.
been wanting to go so bad.
Yeah, so I was in Detroit once. It was when I was like a little kid in middle school. But we drove, like, we were kind of in a rush, but we wanted to drive by Motown and just see it real quick. And it is just a small little house in like a cul-de-sac.
That's awesome.
And it's
See,
just it's unbelievable,
and
like the music that came out of that house.
that's punk as hell because you know all these 40-year-old punk dads all go to the Discord house in Arlington and like try to get their pictures out front like they're Ian MacKaye. It's like Motown was doing it well before Discord was. It's like I actually drive past the Discord house like semi regularly, and it's just so weird because yeah, it literally is just a house on the corner of the street, and it's like every time I do it, I have to double take. I'm like, that's the Discord house, right? And it's like, yeah, that is, but it it is crazy how much amazing music has come out of Detroit in so many different genres. I mean, you can make the case for like techno music being invented in Detroit. Detroit and Chicago, it kind of bounces back and forth. I think house is a little bit more attributed to Chicago, where like techno is attributed to Detroit, and certainly punk rock. I mean, just between the powerful trifecta of Death, the MC5, and the Stooges, like that makes the case right there for like Detroit being an essential punk hub. And I think we see them pop up again a little later, with the second wave of punk music getting its juice. But we'll talk about that and a little bit later. I think we still maybe want to love on Death a little more, or
Oh
yeah.
yeah. I don't even know if we've said the name of their album, but it is dot 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 for the whole world to see. Is the main album, the one album that they made together, the one that they wanted to release on a label. They never got signed. Labels said it was because of the name band. They said no one would want to listen to a band named Death, and so they were never signed. They're like, we love the sound, but we can't sign a band named Death. And then after that, the brothers kind of broke up the band. The Bobby and Dennis Hackney. Bobby played the drum. Bobby played the bass and was the singer. Dennis was the drummer, and David was the guitar player. And Bobby and Dennis went on to kind of play in reggae bands and reggaeton bands, and later on we'll also be getting into kind of how reggae music is also such a major influence on punk. Um, but yeah, they went on to sort of play in some more reggae and reggaeton bands. And David, the guitar player, he was sort of the main driving force behind the band. He was the one who came up with the name Death. And the brothers, like when labels were talking to them, Bobby and Dennis were saying like we can change the name and we'll be signed, and like people will listen to this album, they'll love it. And David was like, no, we like Death, like this name, it's perfect, like this is the name of our band. And he had this symbol too, and it's kind of like three dots and a triangle almost, and he's like, it's the like the name, the symbol, like it's all perfect. Like he had this huge vision for the band. And they never signed. And
And
David
that's
kind of
punk as
felt,
hell.
yeah. And David, he sort of, I guess he fell into a deep depression after that and started drinking, and then eventually, he passed away. Before anybody knew Death, it was because I don't remember if it was Bobby or Dennis Hackney, but like one of their sons or something, like some relative just like found up in their attic a box of the singles, and they're like, oh yeah, like that was, like those are just some records that we made back in the day, and listened to it and was just like what? Like
Yeah.
this is before the Ramones. And no, like they are truly just like unbelievable, so ahead of their time. And because of the fact that they were black artists, yes, they, I think labels said that is because their name was Death, but I think if they were a white band and their name was Death, they would have been signed, you know We have bands like the Butthole Surfers and Suicide coming out, not too long after. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we have been disparaging on like, you know, across the pond, if you will, punk music across the pond. While it is largely punk, when punk goes to Britain, it does unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, I think it sheds some of the racial relevance that it had in America for a sort of class, a focus on class, which was in some ways, uh, I don't want to say it was a bigger issue in Britain because there was quite a lot of racism in Britain towards especially people who are from the West Indies and from the Caribbean. Um, and that is something that kind of gets washed over in a lot of like British punk music. But one of the ways in which British black artists, especially I think a hugely influential British black artist who maybe in some ways does get her due in the canon a bit, is Polystyrene and
oh
X-Ray
my God,
Specs.
yes.
I mean, like the idea of like just creating one perfect album and then kind of like dissolving as a band is a really it's a really cliched punk gesture, but X-Ray Specs just gave us basically the first Riot Girl album, and like the well before the Pacific Northwest like picked it up again in the 90s. You had Polystyrene, a I believe a half African and half British. I want to say that I think Ethiopian or possibly Libyan, but I could be wrong. Or maybe I think it might be Somali. But I could be wrong, and I feel bad for not having that information in front of me. But she was singing about things that like well predates Riot Girl or any other sort of feminist or identity-based punk music, and it resonates a lot more than the sort of bad boy posturing of like the Sex Pistols of like I want to be anarchy. Feels kind of hollow in our current moment, where songs like "Oh Bondage Up Yours," like they just don't, they still resonate because they come from a place of genuine of like being othered and being out of place and not knowing um if the future will have the same like wealth that it is guaranteed to other people because they're a man or because they're white, or because they're straight. And I think that like that's why X-Ray Specs of a lot of early British punk, it resonates more, and it has way more legs.
My favorite quote of hers is it's something along the lines of I never want to be like I'm not their sex symbol, and I never want to be like the second that like they try to turn me into one, I will shave my head. Like it just like so punk, so badass, and it truly is just like the Riot Girl attitude before anyone else was even on it. Just oh like it's that like it's that music that's dangerous for me to drive to just because like I get like so just pumped up and I'm like, oh my God, like I just want to like kick down some doors, start a revolution, like it's just it's so awesome. And yeah, like the like make a perfect album and leave is just it's again so fucking punk rock. And they're a band that is so overlooked. 1976 is when they were around. So here we are in the break zone. And really quickly wanted to highlight that it's an important time to donate to so many different funds, but it's important to look local. I live in Maine, and for a while kind of was under the impression that I'm a predominantly white state and I should be donating a lot to kind of funds in other states. But Once I started to look into sort of the area that I was from, I realized that like I am by no means free. My area is by no means free of the brutality that police have unleashed upon people of color, and it's so important to, like we've said throughout this episode, educate yourself and looking locally, looking at cases in your area of police brutality, highlighting those to officials in your area, and yeah, just finding out how you can help in your area, whether it be a protest or donating to a local bail fund. But yeah, just looking local, look across. There's just so many resources across the internet to donate to.
Yeah.
We will try to use our Instagram to post some of those resources, but again, yeah, look local, look to places around you that you can help.
Yeah, one of the easiest ways, if you feel like out of your depth in finding one of those either bail funds or organizations, is most cities around the country and even a lot of small towns have a Black Lives Matter or a Black Lives Matter like adjacent activist group. And even if it's just like not a super active group or chapter, but it does have like an Instagram or a Twitter that you can go to, or a Facebook or a website. Go to that website, go to that Twitter, go to the Instagram, and just scroll through like the bio, scroll through the posts. I guarantee you there's a link somewhere to something in your area that will help people who have been brutalized by the police, who have been wrongfully convicted, who have been, just been preyed over by a predatory system. And it's a really easy way to make a small donation and make a small difference. And get out there if you feel like, I think that some people might still be concerned about social distancing or quarantine, but we do find ourselves in a lifetime defining, generation defining moment. And I think that if you're smart, if you wear a mask, if you wash your hands when you get home, if you don't touch other people, you can participate and you can be safe and you can feel fulfilled in what you do. And give everybody their space to be comfortable and to be healthy. But it is important that this is our generation's like defining moment. This is what we stand for, to create a future that we look forward to rather than be afraid of. And so don't let the fear mongering of people who a few weeks ago wanted nothing more than for everyone to return to work and to for the elderly and the sick to die. Don't let their fear mongering keep you from being involved in a way that puts your body next to other bodies and makes people feel the value of numbers and support.
Yeah. So I don't think we want to say much more here in this break. Right now is not a time to talk about what we're doing in the podcast. You can follow our Instagram. You know what that is. But just keep using your voice. Keep doing it. Keep donating. Your dollars help too. I'm lucky enough to be working right now and trying to circulate as many dollars as I can into people who are not as privileged as I am, because it's really crucial right now to use your voice, use your dollars, use social media too. We're so lucky to have that in both a time of quarantine and a time where we need to spread messages. So we'll get back to the episode, but keep using your voice and remember that Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. Back to the episode. British punk is very weird because it is so focused in the early years on like a class solidarity and being against like the royal family and being against the system in Britain that was like really, really heavily disadvantaged towards the working class. Like I think the 70s in Britain were especially rough. They were really rough in America as well for the working class. But in Britain, it was really, really bad, like heavily deindustrialized and people losing their jobs. And so British punk has uh, a very, it's very timely in some ways that make it not like last as long. There's a lot of British punk from the 70s and early 80s that kind of feels very dated now. And I think that one of the sort of the break off points that resisted feeling that dated was as punk shifted into its sort of subgenres, especially post punk. And a lot of people will say ska as well. I'm not personally a really big ska fan at all, but I do know a lot of people really love ska, and I think that ska has lasted. Like there are still people who making ska music. There are still people who love ska music, and you cannot talk about British post-punk or British ska without the heavy influence and appropriation of Jamaican and Caribbean and West Indie music styles, ranging from reggae or dub or rock steady or calypso. Because apparently, like that was just all British people listened to. They loved Caribbean music, even while they were so vehemently racist towards Caribbean people living in Britain. And I think that's very telling, and I think that it's really unfortunate that a lot of those elements they don't live on as like authentic black British music, and instead they become canonized through white people taking influence from black music.
Yeah, ska is. I'm not a huge ska fan either. It just makes me think of like checkered vans and fedoras and
Yeah.
trumpets.
Yeah. The mighty boss tones.
Get up, get up,
That's
get
all I
up, get
think.
up. Whoop. But yeah, it is just such a another kind of unfortunately appropriated music, because I'm sure there are some good ska bands that I am just not aware of that are sort of more attuned to like the reggaeton roots that it comes from. Because I know, one artist who I really love, Toots and the Maytall, who
Yeah.
are reggaeton band, like one of the original reggaeton bands, but again, sort of a if you will, punk rock sort of influence. The song 5446 was my number is probably their most popular song, but it's a song about getting out of prison, and
Oh, don't
someone
forget
else.
Pressure Drop though.
Yeah,
Pressure Drop. Gotta love Pressure Drop.
Pressure Drop. They're like so many classic songs, and they're all like political and about sort of giving Toots a voice and speaking up, and it truly is punk rock if you get down to it.
Yeah, I think that with what eventually becomes like we now have Afro punk and um we now have like both Black American music and just sort of Black world music that has a very strong like liberationist and anti-racist message at its core. And I feel like that's very indebted to strong black voices from Jamaica, from the Caribbean, and from Africa, with genres like Afrobeat from Africa, from like Nigeria, like people like Fela Kuti, or you have obviously Bob Marley. I mean, he really gets he really gets unfortunately kneecapped by like white reggae dudes who like wear drug rugs and have dreadlocks and are like like Bob Marley
Dude, I
is just
smoke
about
weed, dude.
yeah, exactly.
Bob Marley changed my life.
It's crazy how he's I feel like in a lot of ways like MLK has been co-opted by white America to just be like it's all about peace, man. It's all about coexistence.
Smoking weed
When
and chilling out,
they,
bro.
they're both like at the heart of both of them, they were black liberationists and they used militant language and they wanted like listen to Get Up Stand Up or listen to Exodus, and like you hear the aggression and the anger and the frustration through that music, and you can't be like it's all about peace, man. Like it's about resistance, and that is punk as hell, and people would rather just sort of dilute it down to a simple digestible message of like one love, man, than I don't know, then look at a more multifaceted and complex like Black identity that it is more important and more influential to the music we love than just one love. It's music to listen to at the beach.
I want to go back to Death again, just because this kind of tangent made me think of this song. But Where Do We Go From Here, I think is just such like a badass song and like a badass like scream of like, it's we always feel like we're at this point of where do we like where do we go from here? We're at this big revolution, and we I feel like we continually ask ourselves, where do we go from here? And it's continuing to obviously educate ourselves and stuff, but there's still always so many questions. And all of these artists are always kind of searching for that. Bob, like, going back to Bob Marley, like, yeah, definitely super co-opted by weed smokers across across America, but just songs about trying to find where you fit in, and where you go. And it's something that neither Dylan and I can ever understand. We I think we both had to do some research for this episode, which speaks to our privilege as music listeners. Like, we are attracted to punk music that sort of speaks to us a bit more, and so these artists are ones who we love, but are ones who were not like they're not put onto our playlists, and or sort of like there are recommended playlists and things like that, because of the music that we generally listen to. And so it sucks to see these artists wiped away,
Yeah.
because they are so influential, and they are what created so much of the music we love. But we get sucked into these music holes as listeners, and we get comfortable in where we listen, and we feel uncomfortable branching out into other genres at times. And being a good music listener, I think, is something that is Dylan and I are both working on, especially with this podcast too. I know I have been trying to be more unbiased as a listener, and trying to push myself to listen to more music and stuff like that. And it's just a constant learning process of where music came from, and all these bands who are just so amazing and deserve the spotlight, but aren't given it. So
Yeah.
I know I've kind of been rambling
Yeah.
on a crazy tangent here, but yeah,
No, I mean, I agree. Like
yeah.
I think there's so many instances where like I look back and I feel like the the music that has been so influential to me has been mostly from these genres that everyone just sort of quietly, subconsciously, maybe sometimes not subconsciously, but just I consciously and with strong, like, subconscious racism assumes are just like quote unquote white genres, like whether it's punk or hard rock or like metal or post punk. We all sort of have accepted this sterilized safe history that really excludes and makes invisible people who were creating the most extraordinary and at times the most revolutionary versions of the music we love. And it's sad to see that, like, so often I think people, like, I mean, I'm guilty of it too. For the longest time, we yeah, I agree, we fall into easy and comfortable listening habits that are guided by more institutional forces, whether it's streaming algorithms or whether it's the radio or whether it's, you know, what is recommended by, like, I don't know, like if you buy music through iTunes or buy it through like the mail, and it's like frequently bought with this album is this album, and it always ends up reinforcing an idea that black voices did not build and black voices do not belong in punk music, and that is objectively false and just like demonstrably wrong. And I think that one of the easiest ways that I've found to combat like that ignorance is just if I notice that there are no black voices in the music I've been listening to, it's not because they don't actually exist, it's because I haven't put in the effort to find them, and it becomes an active and involved process to like excavate that history, and it's so rewarding. It's eye-opening, and it's at times frustrating and disheartening to see people left out of what they're due, but it becomes rewarding when you find that music and you realize it's so amazing, like Death, or like Sun House, or like Junior Kimbra, or like Polystyrene, or the list goes on and on and on and on. But it is important that white listeners ask that of themselves constantly, 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 constantly,
And I
because
think,
yeah,
yeah,
it's on
our
us.
our listeners too, like this, we Dylan and I aren't saying this is the end all be all compendium of what black punk music is. These are just some bands that stand out to us.
Yeah.
We are on a very base level search here of music. We are just trying to encourage ourselves to keep digging in music, because there are so many artists who have been forgotten in the past, and even today who are looked over, because they're black. And it's, please, like with all of these bands we mention, and if any of this sounds interesting, keep searching. And
Yeah.
with any of the genre that of music that you listen to, like, keep digging. There's so much to find, so
And
many
share
interesting
it.
bands to
Share
find.
it
Yeah.
with everyone. Share it with us. Share it with the people around you. Like, that's the most important thing, is if you find something that you feel like hasn't gotten its due, that's amazing, you got to share it. You got to let people know, because that's how the work of setting the past right and moving forward into a better future gets done. Is just making sure that other people are doing the discovering with you.
Yeah, so please do not think we know everything, because we know
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
This is we're so base level knowledge here with what we're talking about. Like, I
Yeah.
stumbling our way through this, but please, yeah, like, we have some more artists we want to talk about here, but yeah, just please keep digging, keep searching
Yeah.
for more artists, and share them with us.
Yeah.
But
It's
I think we should start talking about the Gories a little bit here.
yeah. I
We started here in 1973 with Death, the punk band before punk, moving into 1976 with X-Ray Specs, Polystyrene fronting them, who's just like badass punk, girl rock, girl punk, Riot Girl, and now here we are, 1986 with the Gories.
heading back to Detroit again, and it couldn't be more fitting. And I feel like, especially, I think this feels right at home with like me and Austin, because I feel like what we bonded over when we like first started to get to know each other was the fact that we both just like were absolutely in love with kind of like the garage punk renaissance that was sort of going on in the like early 2010s. Like, if we were two sides of the coin, it would be like the Ty Segall and OC's coin. And you can't have either of those artists, and you can't have any of you can't have King Gizzard, you can't have any of these sort of psych rock artists, these garage punk artists, without heading back to the late 80s and to Detroit, and to realizing like what the Gories were doing, led by Mick Collins. It's just it's a classic reinvention of the punk ethos, but mixing in those like older black music, whether it's the blues, or whether it's sort of like 50s rock and roll, or whether it's like sort of like 60s kind of like college rock, like the Kingsmen, or like the song Louie Louie. Like, it's all those different things mixed together with like an unescapable sense of like DIY and punk rock.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, garage rock in general just has so much to owe to black music. Again, touching back to like the Delta blues, like that is garage rock before garages even existed.
Yeah.
It would be garage rock if they had garages, but it's like the idea that you just have a tape recorder and can make some music. And yeah, the Gories. And we kind of made a little time jump here, which I feel bad that we made to 1986, because we're forgetting like the Bad Brains in 1982,
Yeah.
hopping over like to DC. All these bands, with the Bad Brains again touching back to sort of reggae and dub and ska music, like Bad Brains, like pulling from all of that and just being some of the rawest, loudest punk music out there. And yeah, all of these bands just like playing into that DIY garage lifestyle leading into the Gories in 1986, of like you're like, you and your friends are in the garage just like screaming about what makes you angry. And
Yeah.
that, like,
There's
that's just, it's so cool.
there's a really cool sort of like mini series. Like I think there's about 4 or 5 20-minute kind of like episodes of it's kind of like a garage rock documentary that is, I think it was made by like Vice or something. It was filmed in about 2010, and they interview Mick Collins, and he was talking about how, like, I don't have the exact quote because it's been a while since I've seen the documentary, but he talks about how he was saying like living in Detroit in like the 80s, it was basically like playing rock music with your friends. Like it was it was what you like had to do to just like survive. Not the crime or like all the stereotypical like fear mongering like BS that gets like labeled to Detroit, but just to survive like the monotony of what it was like to live in a city that was stripped of its industry, of its jobs, by the government, by institutions, by companies. And it was like rock and roll was like the savior of like their boredom, because I think the blessing of like music is that like when all else fails, like you can turn to music, like you can make music. And it was cool to hear him talk about how it's been kind of like, the guiding light of Detroit, like despite the bad rap it's gotten from people who fearmonger about black people and who fearmonger about crime and poverty, Detroit has been the source of some of the most amazing music in not just like the 70s and 80s, but in the past like 10 years. I mean, I feel like a lot of white people will point to Eminem as a very obvious thing, but even outside of Eminem, there's been an amazing amount of black music coming out of Detroit in all genres that shows that when you take away what people use to prop themselves up, whether it's their jobs or their houses or the industries that they pride themselves on building, they will always find a way to create a new meaning for themselves and to show like their power and their identity through it. And Detroit's music is
got
powerhouse
some
testament to that city.
got some artists off the top of your head you're feeling, you want to list off,
From
representing Detroit.
Detroit specifically, well, there's Mick Collins' run of different bands. The Gories, certainly. Also, the Dirt Bombs is another band that he fronted, um, with a artist named Ko, who is, I believe, she is the guitar player in the Dirt Bombs, and then she has a band called Ko and the Knockouts that's Detroit based. There is obviously, I mean, I feel like very obviously the White Stripes, a band that is super super indebted to black music and to the blues and to garage rock and to the Gories. Um, but then you have other artists like from Detroit. I'm trying to think. I feel like right now I'm thinking within the realm of like garage rock and punk, and so I feel like maybe if I start thinking outside of that genre, I'll start to hit on other artists. But for the time being, I mean, I feel like Detroit is, besides for San Francisco, I think Detroit is easily like the garage rock capital of the eastern half of the United States.
Yeah, Yeah, and then over to DC with bands like Bad Brains, it becomes more hardcore and yeah, just guitar driven. Where the Garage, it's got that fuzz and that DIY, but then DC, it's got that just yeah that hardcore anger and aggression with the voice in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh well,
Um,
Proto Martyr. Can't believe I forgot about them. Proto Martyr, of course, is from Detroit.
are they from
Good.
Detroit?
Yeah, good on me to forget one of my favorite bands where they're from. But I guess I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think in the realm of black punk music. And I'm glad that when you search Detroit punk bands, I'm glad that Death is in the top 5, but I do think that it should be. I think it should be the number one because it's where it starts. The Gories
Yeah,
should also be up higher. You get Negative Approach. I don't like Negative Approach.
I
They're
don't even
like
know who that is.
they're kind of like a they're kind of like hardcore. They're sort of they're I lump them in with a lot of those like kind of cringy sort of like really like super super fast like Black Flag clone bands where it's just sort of like and it's like the song is done and it's like that's like it's like the 1.5 minute songs that like all of them are like about like kick Reagan like Reagan
Yeah.
sucks like they're all just like kind of clones of each other. But I guess Negative Approach is pretty I guess important. I think it's stupid that the Romantics are number 3 and Death is number 4. The Romantics aren't even a punk band. The Romantics have that song What I Like About You. Yeah.
Dude, that's punk as fuck.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Dude, what I like about you is when you kill Maggie Thatcher. That's what that song's really about. I think we should maybe even again going through our timeline here, maybe start to talk about some modern artists and how kind of punk now for black artists I don't think as much of like what we consider punk because like I think the sort of yeah, like what punk music is very whitewashed. The sort of the whole genre has become that Sex Pistols, Ramones idea of what punk is.
Yeah.
Though there are many other bands who've come in to influence it along the way and are we are definitely glossing over. I can't encourage this enough for people to look beyond what we are saying here because we are not talking about all of the black bands in and in between this tall timeline. But yeah, talking about some modern artists and how punk now maybe isn't the same sort of classic idea of punk, but how it is. I think that black artists are so much better at sort of fusing genres together where it still
Yeah.
holds that punk ethos but is something so much different and something so much more unique and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've shown us how to like carry the torch of the idea of punk more than a lot of these bands that I feel like have just decided that punk music is more the structure of the songs and like the guitar has to be distorted and like it has to be fast. It's like that's never really been I, I feel like that what genuinely punk has been about. Like it's been about an ethos, like a method of creation, an approach to creation, and an approach to like community and like authenticity. And I think that like black artists in the past like decade have just shown that in spades. From one of the artists that I really wanted to talk about that just literally is maybe like the most exciting and just like groundbreaking band for me that has shattered like my conception of like
how to fuse genres and just like be almost in a sense genreless is Death Grips. And like I don't want to be that stereotypical like white punk music guy who's like obsessed with Death Grips because
But we are.
but like I am. It's undeniable that yeah, it's undeniable that what Stephen Burnett and Zach Hill, and I always forget the third guy's name, and I feel bad because he makes all the instruments and like the beats, but like Zach Hill and Stephen Burnett are like they're like the powerhouse. They're the drums and the voice, and like Death Grips is the drums and the voice, and it's just insane to see the way that they mesh rap and noise rock and like experimental things and techno like into this just like insane like whirlwind of like anger and just like pure like punk expression. And I honestly think I think if I had to just like put it up on the board, like best current punk bands, I think I can make a strong case for Death Grips being the best current punk band. Like right now, I think I seriously think that it'd be hard to convince me. There's a lot of bands I love, but I think just like the purest distillation of like punk music, I think it might be Death Grips.
Oh yeah, I could get on board with that. Death Grips is music that I can literally feel in my body, where it like there's like some songs that like make you feel uncomfortable in a sense with
Yeah.
some of the noises that are happening, but it's like that cool punk, like out there, like avant-garde, just like noise that like you feel kind of trickling down your spine. And even like songs just like ga 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 ga, like you just feel that like tickling throughout your whole body when he's singing that. And yeah, just like so so awesome, out of Sacramento. um
I
and
feel like
still 2011 was their first album, still pumping out music,
yeah.
still just like
And
still so cool.
still mysterious. Like I think that's one thing that impresses me in especially like now with the internet age. It's easy for a low profile artist to create like a mysterious persona. Um, but like there's not a lot of artists who still can maintain sort of this like odd sort of like avant-garde like internet personality in the same way that Death Grips have. Like they're like people don't really know a lot about them, and like I can't really like find much like to read about like I mean Zach Hill is Zach Hill and he's been in a lot of other bands, so there's a lot about him. But Stefan Burnett, like there's not a lot on the internet about him and like just like his approach to music making. And that's like the cool part about it is like
It's
this
fucking
mystique.
punk rock,
Yeah.
bro.
Yeah.
Fucking punk,
It's
man.
it's cool. I also love I do love the memeability of them. There's a hilarious picture that I thought for the longest time was photoshopped, but I found out I can't remember. I think it was through like seeing them like it was talked about on the YouTube video or something. There's a photo of Death Grips, Robert Pattinson, and Beyonce all in the same place. Like, and it's so strange. It's like I guess Robert Pattinson is apparently a huge Death Grips fan, and like they met each other backstage at something, and then like Beyonce was also there, and it's like this doesn't seem like this is a super group. This is a super group that needs to be formed right now.
Oh man, another artist I want to talk about on the total other end of the spectrum, I guess, dipping out of punk rock, dipping more into the indie genre. Had them in my staff pick this week, but it's a Vagabond. Any of their albums, but
Yeah.
I just want to shout them out as indie rock is something again that is so whitewashed, and it is such a whitely dominated genre, where Vagabond is breaking that mold and doing like what all of sort of these kind of snail mail, Claro, that kind of that bedroom pop scene is doing, and doing that, and so much more. So if you haven't heard the album I don't know why I always mess up saying infinite and infant. It's a problem I have, but
Say
infinite
infinite
worlds.
infants 20 times fast.
Yeah. Infinite Worlds is just like such a phenomenal album, and it's, comments about kind of being a black woman in America, and just how they feel kind of in certain spaces, and something we can never understand, but that album is sort of a window into that, and it's not it's so relatable at the same time too, even for me. Like there's songs about kind of moving out of your childhood home, and they're just like so emotionally resonant. And yeah, listen to Vagabond.
Yeah, that song, The Embers, and I guess especially like timely right now on that album, Minneapolis. Those two songs hit so hard. I remember I feel bad that I hadn't really listened to a lot of Vagabond before we made that playlist. But I listened to, like, the minute I heard that song you added, I listened to that whole album. I was like, dang, this is so good. It's cinematic, and it's gut-wrenchingly like honest in a way that sometimes punk music doesn't get to be. Like, I feel like punk music goes for sort of like the gut punch, like the instant reaction, like the speed and ferociousness, but it doesn't get to be like, it doesn't get to explore like the dynamics of like being delicate and being heavy-handed, and like a sense of sort of like, I don't really know how to describe it, but like a more cinematic kind of music making, and Vagabond just has that in spades. Like, that album is an experience. I really want it on vinyl. You bought like one of the last ones on Bandcamp Day,
Yeah, I got it on Bandcamp Day. I was so excited.
and I
I
didn't.
think it's because I got it early in the morning, and
Yeah,
I think a lot of people that day just like got that record. But
yeah.
oh my
Yeah,
God,
quick shout out if they do that again, if Bandcamp does that again and they do another proceeds, like, I hope a lot of these labels continue to do proceeds to either bail groups or to, Black Lives Matter like groups across the country. Go on Bandcamp, figure out what labels and what artists to support. Look who's supporting who's giving their proceeds where, and get music made by Black people. Expand your horizons and support a good cause.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, we really like we've said so many times, we're scratching the surface here with a lot of these artists. These are some standouts for Dylan and I. But we really encourage you, keep digging, keep digging. Like we know nothing.
Yeah.
We know nothing. These are some artists we like, but yeah, this is just a brief window into so many artists who are looked over and not appreciated. And yeah, I kind of wanted to again transition a little bit back into how punk has maybe not had the same sound as what we think of as punk, but how black artists and black music has reinvented the idea of what punk can be. I know you're not as huge on them as I am, but I really love Run the Jewels, and I like 100% think of them as like a punk band. Like their attitude is just so like, it is quintessential punk. Fuck you. Like we do what we want to do, and all four of their albums so phenomenal. They just dropped Run the Jewels 4, and oh my God, I love it. They're like they just like get you so pumped up, and love Killer Mike. LP just makes some of the like best produced beats I've like ever heard.
That's my biggest problem. I'd love
resonate to
them
me.
so much more if LP just didn't rap as much.
Yeah,
I
I feel
do
that.
I do love I love Run the Jewels production. I love Killer Mike's lyricism. I love like the perspective he brings as a black rapper who's also like a black activist, and like some of his politics, like his kind of gun related politics, I don't really vibe with, but I do absolutely think that he is like an amazing like leading voice in Black activism and in different struggles in like Black communities. But I think that like LP's rapping style always seems to like it always seems to like lean on kind of like dated sort of like sexual rap tropes that I feel have like they wouldn't even feel they'd feel dated even in like 2008. Like I don't know, like rapping about like your sexual exploits like as a man especially doesn't really it doesn't hit me with the same excitement and like sense of purpose that like Killer Mike's raps about like police injustice and like systemic racism and just the different things that like the angles that he like approaches. And it feels like it constantly feels like there's a strange like dichotomy in the songs. Like the songs will always feel very very split between the two rappers, where there doesn't always seem like a unifying like theme of a song. Like I don't know, like I loved Run the Jewels too. I absolutely like listened to that top to bottom when it came out. But I always found that it was like, man, I'm so excited for LP to stop rapping so Killer Mike will be back on the mic. Like
If you haven't listened to any of Killer Mike's solo stuff, I would highly recommend it. I actually knew Killer Mike before I knew Run the Jewels, because he was like big in Adult Swim for some reason. Like Adult Swim showed me so much music. Shout out to Adult Swim, sponsor
I was
us.
never allowed to watch Adult Swim.
Me neither. But
I'm still not
hey,
allowed to.
when you're up for Adult Swim, you hop in. But yeah, kill. There was like some like one of those like in between commercial bits was like these segments with Killer Mike where he would just like educate you on politics and stuff like that. And it's just classic Killer Mike. And from there I was like, who's this Killer Mike guy? And I started listening to Killer Mike, and yeah, he's got some great records on his own before Run the Jewels. And then yeah, going into Run the Jewels, just like I love Run the Jewels. I can understand not like loving LP's part as much, but yeah,
I love his production. I love his
Oh,
production. It's so heavy and it's so
Yeah.
like blown out and like intense, but his rapping, it's just
Yeah. Meow the Jewels is a triumph in in what music can be. All those cat samples, like, whew, that's top tier. Oh man, I think we're about at our time here. We've only scratched the surface on so many of these artists and stuff, but I think from here we want to pass the baton on to our listeners and encourage you to do some more listening yourselves. These are artists that Dylan and I love, and hope you listen to and love too. But by no means is this the timeline you should consider to be the end all be all of what black punk rock music is.
This is a drop in the bucket. This is the motivating, handful in the ocean of amazing music to explore.
Yeah. So please keep listening, keep educating yourselves, and keep participating. It's no time to be silent right now. Sharing a post really does mean something. As corny as that sounds, I think it does show support, and yeah, just even if you're listening to this and you are adverse to the Black Lives Matter movement at all, we probably don't want you here.
Yeah, if we're being honest.
But please educate yourself if you've even stuck through this whole episode and you're not in the Black Lives Matter movement. But yes, please continue to educate yourself, and thank you for listening. Again, this is a blip in the timeline of Black music. But Dylan, my man, glad to be back in the podcast world with you. It's been a while since we've been in this zone.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that it feels good that like we can like we have a platform to be able to, in a small way, like make space for voices that like should be highlighted and celebrated in this time. Like I think it's a little I mean, I think it's really words to live by. Like we've used them in a couple of posts, but I can't remember where I first saw them, but like it was somebody, it was like a white content creator that like I appreciated their work, and they said that like somebody commented on like why aren't they talking like more about this, and they had been sharing things, and they had been like highlighting people of color and like their takes on issues, and they said like, you know, it's my place to be an ally, but it's not my place to like try to tell especially people of color the way that they should be like being activists, the way that they should be like looking at these issues. Like all I can do is like follow black leaders, listen to black voices, and say that like Black Lives Matter, and be the best ally that I can be. And I think that that is something that like we want to put out to like any of our, especially our white listeners, especially our white listeners. Listen to black voices, follow black leaders, and say without a doubt that Black Lives Matter if you believe it. If you don't believe it, you're maybe beyond our helping, but maybe if you listen to the music and you love it, maybe you can find your way to a more compassionate place. But for the people that listen to our podcast that I know and that I love and that I know share, you know, a more compassionate world, you know, view that like we also share, you know, if you're white, continue to be a good ally, and just like, you know, it's on us to help make a better world for all of us. White supremacy is a white issue. It's not on black people to solve it. It's on us to look inside of ourselves and identify our biases, identify the way that we contribute to systemic racism, and fight to eradicate it, because it does not just go away by ignoring it.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Dylan. Looking inward, looking at our own biases, I think this episode was an attempt at Dylan and I looking at our own listening biases, and noticing how we really lean towards a lot of white artists, but we're trying to educate ourselves more, and to find these artists that are truly inspirational to the music we love and have been looked over. So yeah, we really need to. We're not done educating ourselves. There's still so much more we can learn, kind of about how we view the world, and yeah, can just keep looking at how the places that we're raised and the views that we have can be dangerous just because of the system that we grew up in. And we hope our listeners attempt to do the same. Sorry to be a little preachy here, but we really want to try to encourage everyone to do these things, because it's a really amazing movement that we're seeing right now. And I think we should end it here, just on a simple Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, no other way to say it. So thanks again for listening, and we'll be back with more.